So I have a Seat Leon Cupra 280, and unfortunately I've got a couple of engine problems. So hopefully in today's video I'm going to be resolving some of those. One of the issues I've got is the car unfortunately overheats and goes into limp mode. Not always at the same time. So I do have an engine fault code, P00B700. I'll show you that right now. So as you can see, insufficient engine cooling / coolant flow, P00B700. Now I have done some research on this, and I believe the main culprit is this. This is the water pump and thermostat housing assembly, also known as the thermal management module. This thing on the end is what I believe is causing the issue. This is called the temperature management actuator. I think it's basically an electronic thermostat, and I believe this is what's causing the issue. It also does leak. The housing actually leaks, so it needs replacing anyway. So I am doing this. The second problem I've got, strangely, is a bit of oil in the coolant. Now I have done a head gasket block test, and that's absolutely fine. No evidence of combustion gases in the coolant system, so it seems as though the head gasket is okay, I hope. So I believe the fault with oil in the coolant may be down to this. This is an oil cooler. This bolts onto the side of the oil filter housing. So I'm hoping that this will fix the issue. So I'm going to go and attempt to fix these issues, and I'll document my experience on the way. Just to note, this is a very common failure point for the EA888 engines. So all of the 2-litre turbos in like the Golf GTI, Golf R, like Cupra, Skoda Octavia VRS, etc. Really common. These leak, the thermostats fail, they're awful. This isn't so common, so I'm hoping this does fix the issue. So join me. So here I've got the undertray removed, and you'll see red coolant there. It's all damp. I think that might be oil actually. That's a separate issue, but yeah, I've got a very active coolant leak there. Usually when it's sort of an old coolant leak or it's a slow coolant leak, it will become white and powdery, which I believe underneath you can probably see some of. See all that white residue on that intercooler hose there, and you'll see some more pink stuff there. So that pink and white residue, that is coolant. So that's how you know when you've got a coolant leak on these. Very, very common. So I'm going to start off by removing this air duct to give me a bit more access.
So this is just 4 Torx screws that hold the intake air duct in that I'm just removing right now.
Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run the screws back in. I'm going to do that everywhere where I can.
So as I say, running the screws back in the threads where they came from helps you to remember where the bolts go.
So as I say, I'm just going to put the screws back where they came from. That way it's easy to know what goes where and putting it back together. I'm just going to remove this engine cover.
Right, so something I haven't explained so far is where the components actually are. So the coolant pump, you'll probably just about see it down there, barely. Yeah, it's just down there. And the oil cooler is down there. Definitely can't see that. So to actually gain access, the inlet manifold needs to be removed. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. So I'm going to start off by removing this air box. Then got to move a whole bunch of coolant hoses and fuel lines and stuff out of the way to gain access to it and this throttle body. So that's what I'm going to do now. So obviously in my case I have an aftermarket intake tube. Yours will be slightly different to this. So there's this little vacuum hose needs to be removed. Remove the pipe from here, and then this air box should just pull up. A set of picks are extremely useful for this job. So that's that removed. So removing this hose makes this a lot easier, so I'm just going to do it. These coolant hose pliers are really useful. I'll put a link down in the description for ones that are similar. So a good trick for removing coolant hoses is using a pick and just putting it in, being careful not to damage the hose of course, but just put it in, work it all the way around to sort of break that seal, because over time it does become sort of almost bonded to it. So you just put the pick in, work it around a little bit. Ooh, careful not to damage it. And there you have it. Airbox removed. Okay, so there's a load of coolant lines, wiring harnesses and stuff like that needs to be removed. So I'm going to start off by unscrewing this coolant hard line. So there's two screws, one I think T30 there, T30 there. Going to start removing all these connectors, moving these out of the way. I'll disconnect this as well and go from there. Okay, so far I've removed a number of connections, so 4 wiring connections up here. I've removed the connector for the throttle body. I recommend unclipping this from here. It just sort of clips on to the inlet manifold like that. So unclip that first and then undo that, and it is quite tight, but you can just push it down and around and out of the way. Shove it down there. Next, I've got a load of wiring connectors to undo here. I'm going to remove this throttle body pipe here, but now you also have a good look at the bolts that hold the inlet manifold on. So there's 10 of them. There's 8 screws, which I think are T30s by the looks of it, and there's also 2 nuts either side on sort of little studs. So I'm going to crack on with that now. Okay, So now I'm going to go ahead and remove this lower intake hose. So you've got a map sensor there to unplug. There's a couple of Torx bolts, one right there that holds this hard line intake pipe on. There's another one up there. You see my finger? It's not very good. There we go. Just that. And once I've done that, be able to remove this intake hose from the bottom of the throttle body, and it will also give better access for the bottom bolt for this support. So this is like a little support bar that goes down. See if you can see that. This support bar goes down to the bottom and bolts in at the bottom, and it's really difficult to do this without removing this. I have done this before without removing that, and you can just push it down, but I ended up bending it, so I don't recommend doing that. So I'm going to try and actually remove it.
So getting access to these screws that hold the intake pipe in is very difficult. You need a certain length of extension, one that's not too long, not too short. It is essential though that you do remove this intake pipe, because it makes the job a whole lot easier.
Okay, so intake pipe removed. As I mentioned, there's a clamp at the top on the throttle body. There'll be a clamp over this side, over here for the intercooler. Yours will have a slightly different clamp probably, because mine is an aftermarket hose, but yeah, so this just then pulls down after you remove the two bolts, which are T30s, those clamps, and the map sensor. And I recommend doing this because it gives you access to, if you can see it, see at all where I'm pointing, right there, the bottom of the intake manifold support bar thing, which is very difficult to do if you don't remove. So I highly recommend yeah, removing that bolt. It's a triple square spline bolt of some sort. So that's that lower intake manifold support bar thing bolt removed. This is tricky to get to. If you remove that intake pipe, as I've done, it does make things a lot easier, and I used a 3/8 10mm triple square spline socket on an electric ratchet, and that was good enough. I couldn't get any sort of other ratchet on it. I did try with a 1/2 inch, but it's tight, so this worked well. So there's quite a few other things still to remove. There's this little connector here, which is easy to forget about, and also one just there that needs removing. Also remove the oil filter, because this really gets in the way, from what I remember. And also something to be really careful of is down here you have a cam sensor. Let's see if I can point better. Right here, a cam sensor, and this can get easily damaged because, as you can see, it's right up next to the intake manifold, so this can very easily get damaged. And the reason I've had this off before, this intake manifold, is actually to replace this connector, because somebody who'd worked on it previously had damaged it. So if you can, disconnect that first, this connector, and just be really wary of it when you're removing the intake manifold. But yeah, once those few things are removed, there's also this hard line, high pressure fuel line that goes from the high pressure fuel pump down to here, to this rail. So you get a good picture of that right there. Both ends of those need removing.
You'll also notice I'm loosening the screw for the boost pipe. This just gives you a little bit of wiggle room to move that pipe out of the way because it gets in the way of the screw that retains the hard fuel pipe. So you do need to loosen that screw off. And I'm also now loosening off the hard fuel line. This is an 18mm spanner. You can counter hold the other end if the gold piece that it screws onto is spinning too. You can counter hold it with a 19mm. And you can also see I am removing the oil filter.
So I've removed a load of stuff. I have also removed the battery, as you may have noticed. This frees up a lot of room to be able to see what you're doing. There's a little retaining screw that holds the high pressure fuel line in place, so I have unscrewed that. What else? I removed this connector for this sensor down here, as I mentioned, and there's also another one hidden down there. As you start removing the intake manifold, you can then start removing the bottom part of the high pressure fuel line. So I think that's the stage I'm at the moment. Yeah, so I believe it's just a case now of removing these 10 screws. You've got 5 at the top and 5 through little access holes at the bottom. You can probably see little access holes there. So you need a long extension with a T30 and a decent magnet to pull the screws out so you don't lose them. So I'm going to put that on a time lapse. See you in a moment. I'm just unscrewing the bolts at the bottom and feed a magnet in from the top.
So this bit is a little bit tedious, just go slow, take your time. You will need a good quality magnet to be able to do this. It'd be really difficult otherwise, especially for reinstalling the bolts, so make sure you have a good quality magnet. And here you can see I'm removing the lower part of the hard fuel line. I'm having to counter hold it with a 19mm spanner because the gold piece that it threads onto was spinning. You need to remove this part of the hard fuel line underneath once the intake manifold is loose. It's impossible to do without it being loose.
So removing that lower high pressure fuel line was difficult for me this time round because it was sort of seized onto the gold piece. I don't know if you can see it right there. So I had to counter hold it with another spanner, which is very difficult because this thing is in the way. So yeah, but that's done now and that's free. So I should be able to remove that high pressure fuel line. Now that that fuel line is out of the way, I should be able to remove the manifold. Looks like there's a couple of wires just clipped onto this fuel rail there. Yeah, just undone that. Looking okay so far. Looks as though there's this little vacuum line which I might need to remove. It's just got a little union piece there. There we are. I don't know if you can see that little union. Bit of a rubber hose basically. So that's good. Of course, this fuel pipe from the high pressure fuel pump. A bit of silicone spray may help remove these clamps. I'm just using a pick again, as this seems quite seized on. even though I only did this a year ago.
It's quite funny actually that I forget to remove this fuel line when removing the inlet manifold, because when I go to reinstall it, as you'll see later, I actually forget to put it back on as well.
Sometimes it just helps to twist it gently and it will eventually come off. There. Fuel line removed. Now I think this should come out. I think it's this that's stopping it from coming straight up. It's this hard coolant line, so there's just a couple of T30s, one there, looks like there's one there, so I'm going to remove that, and that will allow that to move up hopefully, and allow this to just go straight up.
So yes, you absolutely need to remove that hard coolant line that bolts to the cam cover. You just need to loosen it off.
Our inlet manifold is free. And there it is. Now, you would want to replace this orange gasket here if this was the first time doing this. I only did this about a year ago, as I say, so this gasket is still quite soft by the looks of it. Yeah, not too bad, and it still protrudes from the surface, it's not flat. So if yours is flat, you will need a new orange inlet manifold gasket. And as I say, I didn't remove this. This is the support bracket I was talking about, but it does catch on this plug right here for the alternator, and there is actually a little cable tie that pushes into here. As you can see, mine's now broken. Well, I say now broken, it was already broken, so that didn't get in my way. But yes, you just need to push that through, or just remove this bracket. It's a 13mm nut by the looks of it there, and there you are. As you can see, the inlet manifold runner flaps do get a bit cruddy, so I'm going to clean them up, and we'll move on to the important bit, which is replacing the water pump. So this here is your water pump assembly, and here, you can see it, is the oil cooler. So I'm going to be replacing both of those bits.
So here I'm removing the partitions for the intake, preparing to clean the intake valves. I'm just stuffing some paper down into the ports to make sure nothing falls in.
So while I'm here, whilst the intake manifold is off, I'm going to go ahead and clean the intake valves. So I've done this one for cylinder 1 already. There is cylinder 1, so that's an aftershot. And that, if you can see in there, is a before shot. So all carboned up, all clean. So I'm just basically using a small pick and a vacuum cleaner with this piece of plumbing basically attached to it, so I can just stick it down there and suck up all the hard bits of carbon so they don't go inside the combustion chamber, of course. So I'm just going to do that now. Okay, so I've cleaned all the intake valves, so that's a good job. Well done. You don't have to do that, obviously. That's just something I wanted to do whilst I was in here. So now, next job is to start removing the hoses from the water pump. So you've got a top hose, a middle hose, and a bottom hose. There's 3 hoses to remove. I'm going to take this cover off anyway. It's T25 by the looks of it, and this covers up the little belt that drives the water pump. So I'll be back in a moment. So I've got these clips you pull out, and these hoses should just pull out like that. I've got a bucket down below to catch all of that. snap that back in, so these just pull out like that. And then pull out like that, and I'm just going to snap them back in so you don't lose it. That one out, let that drain a little bit. Okay, the GoPro's died, so I've had to switch to my phone. Anyway, so I've removed this plastic cover that covers the belt, which is right here, which is held on with just 2 screws. This one, just move that out of the way, there's one here, and one down there, if you can get that. One down there, that I had to use a long extension to get to. One there, one there. So I've removed that. And what I'm going to do is slip this belt off. It's not too much tension, so it should be easy enough to do.
If you're reusing your belt, just be really careful at this stage not to damage the belt, and also be careful not to cut yourself on the blades that are on the end of the gear there.
Before I finish doing that, actually, this is like a crank sensor or something, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove that, not the sensor but just the connector, because I don't want it to get damaged, so I'm just going to let that hang out there, and then let's get this belt off. So that's the belt off, and what I'm going to do is remove the screws. They're T30s. This one, now they're captive, so they won't come out, they'll just stay there like that.
So there's 5 screws that hold this water pump assembly on, 3 that are visible from the top and 2 underneath. It may be easier to go underneath the car to get the 2 at the bottom.
Okay, here we are underneath now. So this is the bottom of the water pump. As you can see, I missed one. There we are. That's that undone. And while I'm at it, you can see there's the plug for the thermal management module, or the thermostat, whatever they call it. And remove this. Pull the lever down. Very tricky to do with one hand. So I'm going to do this, put the camera down and do it. So the water pump connects with the oil cooler here with a union piece. So this should come away, but it will probably come out and go that way. You can see already here water gushing. We're going to be drilling it that way and out. There we have it. Old water pump out. Oh, what a mission. So here's the old pump assembly, and you can see here where it's been leaking. Now this does look like it's been replaced at some point, but clearly not with a good quality part. This has no branding on it whatsoever. Yeah, so I don't think this is a genuine part, or even a good quality part. I haven't bought a genuine one. I bought an INI, which is the OEM manufacturer for these anyway. So I'm fine with having an INI one, but this looks just like it's unbranded. So let this be a lesson. For anybody looking to do this job, do not buy an unbranded one. Get a genuine or INI water pump, as they are the original equipment manufacturers on these pumps. So I am actually replacing this belt. The INI kit comes with a new belt and a new bolt. I'll show you here. There's the new belt. new bolt. Now, you're supposed to counter hold the crank whilst undoing it. It's not too tight. So what I did is I just held onto the auxiliary belt to stop the engine spinning and just undid it that way. I've just about managed to do it. Remove this. Now this is counter threaded, so you turn it right to undo it. That's very important to note. So you'll notice I'm turning it clockwise. That is undoing. There we are. The little gear is off. So I'm going to put the new belt on now. Again, turning it counterclockwise to tighten, and I will provide the torque spec when I know it. I'm going to look it up. So the torque spec for the little gear at the bottom is 10 Newton meters plus 90 degrees, and I've just made this little contraption with my torque wrench on a 12mm spanner, and I have the torque spec. I have when I hold the belt. So I'm just going to do the 90 degrees with the spanner and we're good to go. So moving on to the oil cooler now. This is the oil cooler here, and there is 4 T45 bolts. Very strange size. One there, one at the top there, and there's one hidden right behind there, and the only way you can really get to it is by undoing this, what looks to be some sort of ground. So I'm going to take that off. I took the ground off the battery just in case, but yeah, I'm going to undo that, and that should give us enough access to access the bolt at the back, and then it should just pull away. And I've got a new oil cooler and a new gasket. I've just put my hand underneath and there's a lot of oil came out, so I do believe that the oil cooler seal is leaking, so that's probably our issue with the oil in the coolant. These bolts at the back of the oil cooler are extremely hard to get to. As you can see, I've had to use a very thin T45 socket. It's actually a screwdriver bit in an 8mm socket on an extension on a wobbly socket on my electric ratchet, and as you can see I've got it undone, but that is extremely tight. So if you haven't got tools like that, you may need to remove this whole sort of accessory bracket that holds the alternator. So yeah. All of the bolts are out. And there is the old oil cooler. You might be able to see oil is just pouring out of there, so a lesson learned for me: drain the oil first before doing this, because that has made a right mess. So as you can see here, with the oil cooler off, this seal is completely flat. There's absolutely nothing for that to be sealing to anymore. So I'm just going to pick this seal off and replace it with the new one that comes with the new oil cooler. I've not bought a genuine one for this. JPN is the brand I bought. It's from Autodoc. Seems good quality, looks the same. So I'm just going to use this, and hopefully it does the job. So new seal on now, and you'll notice it actually protrudes by a couple of millimeters. So as I say, the old one was completely flush with the metal. There was no sealing surface there anymore, whereas this actually, yeah, protrudes. So that should provide a good seal. And I think I can see where the actual migration of oil and coolant was. It's here. So this has gone really hard, like plastic, and it's sort of got like an edge on it. So these bits are still a little bit soft, but here, where it looks like it's had the most contact with oil, it's damaged it quite badly, and it's gone sort of really completely flat, and it's almost got like a rough edge on it, so it looks like that's where the oil and coolant were mixing. So I'm going to pop the new cooler on now. Again, this is going to be very tricky because of those bolts at the back, but I'm going to try and insert one of the bolts as I'm feeding it in so that it lines up, and then I'm going to torque them up to spec, which I did find the torque spec online, I believe is 10 Newton meters plus 45 degrees, I think. If that's wrong, I will pop it up on the screen now, but you're supposed to also replace them, so I'm guessing they're torque to yield. I'm going to just do the normal torque spec and the angle as well, and just hopefully it'll seal alright, because I don't have replacement bolts, and I need to get this job done. So, but when you're doing this, replace these bolts.
So I'm just running the screws in now with the electric ratchet, just gently, to get ready to torque them up.
So that's the new oil cooler in. The torque spec I said earlier was wrong, it's actually 8 Newton meters plus 45 degrees. So I've done that, torqued that up. As I mentioned earlier, right here there's a little grounding strap that gets in the way of getting to that back bolt, so I've removed that, and it's just this plug. This plug's underneath the inlet manifold. So I'm going to reinstall this. It's very important not to forget that, of course. The bolt is some sort of female spline bolt, but I don't have them, so what I used instead, and this worked quite well, is an E16 female Torx, which grips it quite well. It's not overly tight anyway, so but yeah. So I'm going to reinstall that, and I think I can then start look at putting the new coolant pump on. So before I go ahead and install the water pump, I'm going to use this scraper to just make sure the surface is absolutely flat. As you can see, it is getting bits of gunk off of the surface, so well worth doing. So it's very important to replace this piece. This is a little union piece that goes in here to join the oil cooler and the water pump. So I'm just going to put a little bit of silicone lubricant on it, silicone grease, and put it in, and then I believe we are actually ready to put the coolant pump in.
Installing the new water pump can be a little bit tricky. The best way to do it is slide the belt onto the water pump gear first, then push the water pump assembly to the right hand side as you're looking at it, which should allow you to slide the pump into the union piece that joins it with the oil cooler.
Okay, so the water pump is just sat in at the minute, so it was very tricky to get in, but I got it in. So the trick to it is go in with the side that has the gear on it first, so the gear is slightly facing the engine, because the hardest bit is getting the belt onto the actual gear. Once that's in, you sort of like swing it and push it to the right, which then gives you space at the left hand side to join it with the coupling between the oil cooler and the water pump assembly. And then you can just push it on and it sits on little dowels. I've had a look and there is a torque spec for all these bolts. They're very important. There's an order to them. They're 9mm, and there is a certain order they need to be done up in. So make sure you refer to your manual for that. But I believe the correct order is the top right, top left, the bottom left, right underneath, the one that's really hard to get to, and then the top center, so that one right there, and then the bottom, very bottom right again, underneath, sort of hard to get to. So yeah, I'm going to torque those up now. So that's the new water pump and oil cooler all fitted in. Put the new cover on. Sorry, the old cover on, the belt cover. So these bolts are 9 Newton meters. Very difficult to reach the bottom one as before, you know, when you removed it, but 9 Newton meters. If you can get a torque wrench in there, I just about managed it. And now I think I'm about ready to reinstall the intake manifold. Also, don't forget, if you unplugged this sensor like I did, don't forget to plug that back in, because once that goes back on the intake manifold, then you're going to struggle. In fact, I think it would be almost impossible to put that back in. So yes, make sure you remember that.
So here I'm just reinstalling the intake manifold. Once it's sat in place, before any of the screws are put back in, make sure the bottom part of the high pressure hard fuel line is fully tightened. If you forget to do that and you put the screws back in for the intake manifold, it'll be almost impossible to get a spanner in there to be able to actually tighten the hard fuel line onto the rail. Now that I'm confident there's nothing in the way, I'm going to go ahead and put the screws back in for the intake manifold. I'm just gently running them in with my electric ratchet, and you're supposed to do this in multiple stages, so I'm just screwing the screws in a little bit and then going around and tightening them a little bit more, but not very much, because there is a torque spec that needs to be adhered to. Here you can see I'm using my torque wrench to tighten them to 9 Newton meters, doing it in a diagonal sequence. One thing I haven't mentioned is by this point I have actually filled the cooling system. It's really important to do that once all your coolant lines are reconnected. It's really important to fill the system with coolant and look out for any leaks from the water pump or oil cooler area. If you start reinstalling too much stuff like the engine cover and the airbox and everything like that, you might not be able to see any leaks that appear. So it's important to fill it as soon as all the coolant lines are reconnected. At this point I've already filled all the coolant and I'm happy that there's no leaks, so I'm just preparing to start the engine now.
So everything is more or less back together now, but as I opened the driver's door I could smell fuel very, very instantly, and that's because the pump runs when you open the door, but I thought everything was back together until obviously I looked a bit closer and I've forgotten this pipe on the fuel line here. So it happens, so I'm just going to go over and double check everything again, and then once I've done that we'll move on to the VCDS section, which is where we have to do the basic settings on the actuator thermostat thing. So I'll put this fuel line back on and we'll jump to that. So this is where you need to set the basic settings on the thermostat. So if you press on engine, open up the engine controller, and then go into basic settings number 4, open the drop down and there we go, just scroll down to engine temperature management actuator. Hopefully you can see that, and just press go. And if it's all working, it should say finished correctly, like that. There we go, ready to start.
The audio in this bit of the video isn't very good, so I'm just doing the voiceover. The engine is running well, there's no leaks, all seems good. I'm just going to use this radiator degreaser that I bought from Autodoc. You just pour it in the cooling system with some fresh water and run the engine for 20 minutes and then drain it out again. That should remove all of the oil from the cooling system. I've been driving the car for about a week now and all seems well. There's no overheating anymore, no oil in the coolant, no limp mode, none of that. The car seems absolutely perfect, so this seems to have resolved all my issues. So thank you guys for watching, and don't forget to
like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.